Welcome. We're nearing down to the end of day 2 of this fabulous conference. I'm Doreen Weisenhouse. I remember seeing some of you yesterday at some of our earlier panels. I teach media law and director of the Media Law Project at the University of Hong Kong, and I am absolutely delighted to moderate this upcoming panel. I think you will find it very interesting, and we look forward to getting your comments and perhaps having you share some of your experiences as well. Obviously, if you're here, you know we're here to talk about undercover reporting, when to do it, and when not to do it, and hopefully some of the lessons that have been learned by these 3 practitioners of this practice. So we will have 3 case studies. The first person will be Pramod Ancharia, who is here from Nepal. He is a freelance investigative reporter, has spent a decade working for various media here in Nepal, electronic, print, and online, and has written investigative stories for the Center for Investigative Journalism here in Nepal, which was founded 20 years ago and has served as a training ground for many young journalists. He'll be talking about his latest investigation, literally just a couple of weeks ago, and it's about uncovering fraud on university dissertations for sale. And he had particular difficulties because it was his own university. Our second speaker, many of you may know, is Lagwa Erdene, who is a reporter and executive producer for news at Mongol TV, where he's been since 2013 and quickly made his mark with a very interesting investigation, which he will share with us. And our third speaker is Gargi Bhattacharya, who is a senior producer with Cobra Post, an Indian news website and a television production house known for its investigative reporting and stings. It was co-founded by a person who founded Telhelka. Many of you are familiar with that news organization, which also had some very famous stings. So let's start out with Pramod, and he will tell his story, and he will be assisted by a translator.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, GIJN, to be a part of this conference. I'm very privileged. I'm thinking to be privileged here. And sorry thing is that I'm going to speak in Nepali now. अब यो अन्डरकभर रिपोर्टिङ कुन बेला गर्ने र कुन बेला नगर्ने भन्ने विषय चाहिँ सधैँ बहसको विषय भएको हुनाले यसमा एउटा एक्ज्याक्ट यो नै गर्नुपर्छ यो नै गर्नु हुँदैन भन्ने चाहिँ अहिलेसम्म केही आइसकेको छैन। हामीले यस विषयमा चाहिँ बहस गरिराखेका छौँ। तर मैले मेरो अनुभवका आधारमा यस्तो बेलामा गर्न सकिँदो रहेछ र यस्तो बेलामा गर्न हुँदो रहेनछ भनेर चाहिँ केही कुराहरू बोल्न गइरहेको छु।
There are no universal laws or there are no formulas to decide on which case the undercover reporting should be done or on which it should not be done. But I'm willing to share the cases under which I thought it was a good idea to do undercover reporting, and in other cases where it was not. So I'll just speak from my limited experience.
तपाईले यो जुन स्लाइडमा देख्नु भएको छ यो चाहिँ मैले गरेको 2वटा अन्डरकभर रिपोर्ट्सहरू हो। यसमा सुरुमा देखिएको थेसिस अन सेल टाइटलको रिपोर्टमा चाहिँ मैले कसरी नेपालको सबभन्दा पुरानो र सबभन्दा नाम चलेको युनिभर्सिटीमा डिजर्टेसन्सहरू सोही युनिभर्सिटीका प्रोफेसरहरू, युनिभर्सिटीकै इम्प्लोइजहरू, त्यहाँका लेक्चररहरू, स्टेसनरी सप अनर्सहरू मिलेर चाहिँ बेचिरहेका छन् भन्ने बारेमा चाहिँ त्यो स्टोरी हो। र दोस्रो स्टोरीमा चाहिँ मैले कसरी नेपालका ग्रामीण क्षेत्रमा रहेका हस्पिटलहरूबाट बिरामीहरू अरूको अस्पतालमा ट्रान्सफर गर्ने बेलामा बीच बाटोबाटै बिरामीहरू बेचिन्छन्, तर ऊ बिरामी चाहिँ जहाँ हस्पिटलमा ट्रान्सफर गरिँदैछ उसलाई नै थाहा हुँदैन त्यो कुरा। यो कुरा चाहिँ हस्पिटलहरूले कसरी बिरामी किन्छन् भन्ने विषयमा सम्बन्धित छ।
Okay, there are two illustrations on the screen now. The left one, which is about thesis on sale, is from my latest undercover reporting. It is about how university dissertations are sold in the local bookshop nearby the university. And on the right is about ambulances, how ambulance drivers cheat people, simple village folks who are on their way to city hospitals for better health care, how they are duped, they are cheated, and they are taken to private hospitals which literally buy patients from these ambulance drivers by offering them bribe to bring these poor village folks to their own hospitals so that they can rip them off with exorbitant medical fees.
यी दुईवटा रिपोर्टहरू गर्नको लागि मैले चाहिँ आफ्नो आइडेन्टिटीलाई बदलेर थेसिस अन सेलको लागि एउटा स्टुडेन्ट अथवा एकाडेमिक रिसर्चरको रूपमा चाहिँ प्रस्तुत भएको थिएँ भने दोस्रो रिपोर्ट एम्बुलेन्ससँग सम्बन्धित रिपोर्टको लागि चाहिँ मैले आफूलाई एउटा एम्बुलेन्स ड्राइभरको रूपमा प्रस्तुत गरेको थिएँ।
In the story where I was doing about the dissertations, I had to go undercover as a student myself who was doing a dissertation, and actually I was a student doing dissertation during that period when I was doing this investigation. And in the second story, which I did a few years back, I was posing as a ambulance driver, calling the hospital from my phone, telling them that I have a patient which I can deliver, how much money are they willing to pay me as an incentive.
अब यी दुईवटा स्टोरी गर्नको लागि किन म अन्डरकभर जानुपर्ने भयो भन्ने कुरामा दुईवटा स्टोरीको लागि फरक फरक कारणहरू देखाएको छु। एम्बुलेन्ससँग सम्बन्धित स्टोरीको लागि चाहिँ नि हामीसँग भएको डकुमेन्ट इन्सफिसियन्ट थियो र तपाईले जुन उता यो डकुमेन्ट देख्नु भएको छ एम्बुलेन्ससँग रिलेटेड, यसमा चाहिँ के छ भने तपाईको एम्बुलेन्स ड्राइभरको साइन छ, नाम छ, त्यसपछि हस्पिटलको सेक्युरिटी गार्डको साइन छ र त्यसमा कति पैसा दिइन्छ भनेर लेखिएको पनि छैन, अरु केही पनि कुरा छैन। तर त्यो बिल चाहिँ एम्बुलेन्स ड्राइभरलाई हस्पिटलले दिएको पैसाको बिल हो र यो मात्रै बिललाई आधार मानेर त्यो समाचार लेखेको भएदेखि एउटा पैसा कहाँ छ भन्ने कुरा क्वेशन हुन सक्थ्यो, जुन कुरा हामीले आन्सर गर्न सक्दैनथ्यौँ। अर्को कुरा भिक्टिमाइज हुने भनेको सेक्युरिटी गार्ड र एम्बुलेन्स ड्राइभर मात्रै हुन्थ्यो, तर त्यो बिजनेस भनेको हस्पिटलको डाक्टर र डाइरेक्टरहरू मिलेर गरेको थियो। त्यो भएको हुनाले जस्टिस दिनको लागि हामीले स्टिङ गर्नु पर्यो।
The reason I had to go undercover on each of the story is I'm going to talk about the first story first. In the case of the ambulance story that I did, I had to go undercover because the receipt that I had as a proof that the hospital patients were being bought by the private hospitals, it was not sufficient to prove because the receipt only had a signature of the security guard or the low-level staff of the hospital. But we knew that it was the high-level, decision of the hospitals to buy patients. So in order to expose that high-level connection in this story, I had to go undercover to get the hospital authorities to confess that the decision to buy patients is coming from higher.
दोस्रो स्टोरीमा चाहिँ यो थेसिसहरूको कसरी दोहोरिएको छ भन्नेको एउटा पिक्चर हो। यसमा चाहिँ यो डकुमेन्ट मात्रै देखाएर हामीले समाचार लेखेको हुन्थ्यौँ भने त्यहाँको प्रोफेसरहरूले हामीलाई चाहिँ राम्रो आर्काइभल सिस्टम छैन, त्यो कारणले हामीले कुन थेसिस पहिला गरिसकिएको छ कुन छैन भनेर चाहिँ छुट्याउन गाह्रो छ, त्यही भएर यो एउटा टेक्निकल मिस्टेक मात्रै हो भनेर उनीहरू पन्चिन सक्ने अवस्था हुन्थ्यो। तर यो कुरामा चाहिँ उनीहरूले पैसा लिने गरेको, उनीहरूले आफ्नो नेपोटिजमको कारणले थेसिस पास गरिदिने गरेको, पोलिटिकल पार्टिज एफिलिएसनको आधारमा पास गरिदिने कुराहरू चाहिँ छायामा पर्न जान्थ्यो। त्यो कारणले यसको लागि पनि अन्डरकभर गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था आयो।
So in the second story which I did recently, the reason I had to go undercover was because we had all the plagiarized thesis with us. We had copies of one dissertation which was done by 3 or 4 different students at one time. But had we just provided that as a document proof of the nexus between the university authorities, professors, and the bookshop owners, then they would have pinned it on the students, saying, "Oh, we do not have a secure archive system, so the students somehow got hold of these dissertations and plagiarized it and then presented it." So we needed them to confess that it was actually them who are running this business racket.
अब यो थेसिससँग सम्बन्धित स्टोरी मैले कसरी गरेँ भन्ने बारेमा यो भिडियोमै एउटा इलिस्ट्रेसन गरिएको छ। हामीले एकैछिन यो हेरेर त्यसपछि कुरा गर्छौँ।
Now this is the video which is going to show how this story was done. It has a subtitle.
सुनेको छु मास्टर्स डिग्रीको थेसिस त्रिभुवन विश्वविद्यालय र तिनका आङ्गिक क्याम्पस वरपर छ्यास किन्न पाइन्छ। एउटा विद्यार्थीका रूपमा थेसिसले मेरा लागि निकै ठूलो अर्थ राख्छ। त्यसैले मेरो मनमा स्वाभाविक केही जिज्ञासा उठे। कसले गर्छ होला कारोबार? को संलग्न हुन्छन् होला? कसरी होला किनबेच? कति पैसा लाग्दो हो? आफै स्वयं विद्यार्थी बनेर यी र यस्तै प्रश्नको उत्तर खोज्दा यो रिपोर्ट तयार भएको छ, जसका लागि मैले नदेखिने क्यामेरा समेतको प्रयोग गरेको छु। मैले सुरुमा भेटेका व्यक्ति हुन् जनक केसी। उनले मेरो काम हुने बताउँदै शिवशंकर गौतमलाई भेटाइदिए, जसले विद्यार्थीलाई थेसिस बेच्ने र पुराना थेसिस स्वीकृत गर्न विश्वविद्यालयभित्र सेटिङ मिलाउने काम गर्दा रहेछन्। मैले उनलाई आफूलाई समाजशास्त्रको थेसिस चाहिएको र त्यो जसरी पनि स्वीकृत हुनुपर्ने बताएँ। तर म भन्दा एक कदम अगाडि बढेर उनले भने,
हल्लागुल्ला गर्दै हिँड्ने होइन, घटकन तल राखेर म गराइदिन्छु सर है, एउटा कदमले आजै लिएर आएको त्यहाँ हेर्नुहोस् है, एउटा मैले बाइन्डिङ गरेर लिएर आएको।
तर उनले यसको लागि 12,000 रुपियाँ लाग्ने बताए। गौतम त्रिवी डिन कार्यालयका शाखा अधिकृत हुन्। गौतमसँग भेट गराउने जनकेशी पनि त्रिवीकै पूर्व कर्मचारी रहेछन्, जो हाल कीर्तिपुर नयाँ बजारमा युनिभर्सल फोटोकपी सञ्चालन गरेर बसेका छन्। त्रिवीका कर्मचारी अहिलेसम्म हामीले यहाँ मैले कसरी स्टोरी थाहा पाएँ र म किन त्यहाँ चाहिँ अन्डरकभर गएँ भनेर चाहिँ गरेको इलिस्ट्रेसन हो। हेर्दा यहाँ मेरो पनि सबै एक्सपोज भएको हुनाले यो स्टोरी गर्ने बेलामा चाहिँ अन्डरकभर थियो, पछि मैले न्यारेट गरेर यो सुटिङ चाहिँ पछि गरेको हुनाले यसलाई अहिले चाहिँ एउटा स्टिङ अपरेसन मात्रै भन्न मिल्छ।
You see in the video that it shows my face, but actually the video was made after the investigation was complete, and the clips of the sting operation were incorporated in the narrated video.
हप्ता दिनको प्रयत्नपछि थापा भेटिए। त्रिवी परिसरमै रहेको अर्को पुस्तक पसल हीरा बुक्स मार्फत भेटिएका मनमोहन थापाको काम नै थेसिस बेच्ने हो। उनले त्रिवीका प्रोफेसरहरूसँग आफ्नो मेलेमेतो रहेको समेत बताए।
नबुझन एकैचोटि थेसिस गर्ने भनेको पोलिटिकल साइन्स रामकुमार तालको पालामा गाइड त क्या भन्ने सही ठोकिदिन्छ। म्यानेजमेन्ट प्रोपोजल केही पनि बुझाउनु पर्दैन, सिधै थेसिस लिएर जाने। अचु सर चिनाएको छु मैले, अचु सर नआउँछ, अचु अभाले होइन देवली तपाईँ जस्तो तपाईँ हामीले 100जनाको लेखिसक्यौँ आदिले मात्रै होइन। त्यहाँ अब टिचरहरूले हामीलाई चिन्छ। उमेश आचार्य भनिन्छ, त्यो एकजना भाइको पनि गाइड बसाएर अनि त्यसले चाहिँ छिटो गरिदिएको थियो कि।
एउटै व्यक्ति दुई पसलको सम्पर्कमा भेटिएपछि मलाई लाग्यो थेसिस कारोबारको धन्दा पुस्तक पसलबाट सुरु हुने रहेछ। यहाँ चाहिँ थेसिस लेख्ने जुन गोस्ट राइटरहरू छ उनीहरूसँग कुरा भयो, जसले चाहिँ सेल गर्छ, जसले इन्फ्लिट्रेट गर्छ। त्यो कुराहरू गरिसकेपछि उनीहरूले भट्टाभट प्रोफेसरको नाम लिन थालिसकेपछि अब त्यो हामीलाई फेरि चेक गर्नुपर्ने बाध्यता थियो, किनकि भन्दैमा हामीले रिपोर्टहरू लेख्न चाहिँ अलिकति हेजिटेट नै गर्नुपर्छ। त्यस कारणले म फेरि पनि उनीहरूले नाम लिएका प्रोफेसरले चाहिँ साइन गरेको थेसिसहरू कतिको रिपिटेड भएको छ कि छैन भनेर लाइब्रेरीमै गएर रिसर्च गरेको थिएँ।
It was not sufficient for us to get it out from their mouth that certain professors were involved in the selling of dissertation, plagiarism of the dissertations. We also had to verify looking at the university archives. So we went back and checked the dissertations that the supervisors or the professors had approved of. And we got to know that the same professor had approved more than the same dissertation with same content on more than one occasion.
होला नि त यसबारे बुझ्न मैले 1 महिनासम्म कीर्तिपुर स्थित केन्द्रीय पुस्तकालय र विषयगत विभागमा संग्रहित थेसिसहरू अध्ययन गरेँ। सुरुमा मैले पसलले एजेन्ट र कर्मचारीहरूले भनसुन गर्न सक्छु भनेका व्यक्तिहरूले स्वीकृत गरेका थेसिसहरू हेरेँ। अध्ययनका क्रममा एजेन्टको दाबी सत्य ठहरियो। उनीहरूले भने अनुरूप नै प्राध्यापक डाक्टर रामकुमार दाहाल, प्राध्यापक डाक्टर भवानी शंकर हामीले यसरी चाहिँ ट्रायल गरेर हेरिसकेपछि यसबाट एउटा फाइदा हामीलाई के भयो भन्दा हामीले पेपर ट्रायल र अन्डरकभर रिपोर्टिङ सँगसँगै गर्यौं भने स्टोरीलाई झन् बलियो बनाउन सकिन्छ भन्ने आधार हामीले यो स्टोरी गरिसकेपछि हामीले भेटायौं। यसपछि अब
after we completed our investigation, we came to know that because we had done a sting as well as we had followed the paper trail, we were able to bring into both evidence into light and make a very solid case over here that the thesis was being plagiarized and it was being run as a business.
अब जहाँसम्म कस्तो बेलामा चाहिँ स्ट्रिङ गर्ने कस्तो बेलामा नगर्ने भन्ने प्रश्न छ, यो बहसको विषय भए पनि मेरो अनुभवको आधारमा यदि कुनै पनि विषयले पब्लिक इन्ट्रेस्ट, ठूलो पब्लिक इन्ट्रेस्टको विषय छ भने त्यसमा हामीले गर्न सक्छौं र यो हामीले कुनै पनि व्यक्तिको व्यक्तिगत इन्फर्मेसन चाहिँ लिक गर्नको लागि हामीले अन्डरकभर रिपोर्टिङ गर्नु हुँदैन भन्ने मैले यसबाट चाहिँ एउटा पाठ सिकेको छु।
And now coming to the ethical question of when and when not to do an undercover reporting, as a journalist, I am very clear that we have to have our conscience clear and make sure that the reporting that we are doing is in the public interest, and that by doing a report we are not infringing on the privacy of an individual but actually exposing issue of larger public interest and in the public good.
अब यसको रिस्क र च्यालेन्जेसको कुरा म अन्तिममा छोटोमा गर्छु। यसले चाहिँ हामीलाई अन्डरकभर गरेर स्टोरी गर्दाखेरि एउटा मुख्य च्यालेन्ज भनेको हाम्रो आइडेन्टिटी रिभिल हुन सक्छ कि भन्ने सबभन्दा ठुलो डर हुन्छ। यदि हाम्रो आइडेन्टिटी रिभिल भएको खण्डमा हाम्रो सबै इन्भेस्टिगेसनको प्रोजेक्ट नै चाहिँ रोकिन सक्ने अवस्था हामीलाई आउन सक्छ।
The other challenge that you have to be careful of is your identity. You have to protect your identity at all times when you are undercover, because it could jeopardize your investigation and it could jeopardize your security.
अब यो समयको अलिकति लिमिटेड भएको हुनाले बाँकी रहेको स्लाइडहरु समय मिलेमा फेरि पनि त्यसबारेमा कुरा गर्न सक्छौं।
Because of the shortage of time, I'm shortening my presentation. Maybe we can discuss more during the question and answers.
Yes. Sorry to cut you off because I know you have a lot more to say. We can handle it in some Q&A, and certainly we will have the full PowerPoint posted online. So our next example is going to be Lagwa, and you can share us your experience from Mongolia.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you everyone for coming to our panel when there's parallel. So many other great panels are happening this afternoon. So, journalists, we like to talk about ourselves and our work, and we get an opportunity to share our things that we did, and I think Pramod's story was really interesting. So what we did in Mongolia 3 years ago was that we felt that the Mongolian media landscape, just to give you a short background, the media in Mongolia is partly free. We have about 500 players in a 3 million country. And but since we democratized 26 years ago, commercialization of media, I don't know if you're familiar with the term cream, but cash really rules everything around me. So as an independent broadcaster, we felt that the situation was such a dire situation that we actually tried to sting 9 of the biggest media houses in Mongolia with a fake press release and a payment that followed, to see if they would fact check the story, see if they will run it, see if they will actually review the content that's going to air, because as broadcasters they hold licenses, and some of their responsibilities is actually to educate the public, and because the broadcast airwaves are actually owned by the people of Mongolia. So we set up a fake company called Wholesome Foods Mongolia, and we said McDonald's is going to open in Ulaanbaatar in 14 days, and I had to fake a name, and we recorded the phone conversations, and we started wiring money to 3 of the biggest websites, 3 of the biggest dailies, and 3 of the biggest broadcasters, including the national broadcaster of Mongolia, which by law is not allowed to run any corporate sponsored messages. So the line between editorial and commercial content was such blurred, and we felt that this was the right thing to do. But after it had major firebacks from the media industry, our Journalism Confederation Union usually says Mongolian journalism is 100 years old, but there's a taboo of not criticizing each other's work. We have a saying that says, you don't spit back to the pot that you eat from. So, we set up this thing together with a Danish investigative journalist, Jeppe Nibroy, and we set up this press release, and we put in obvious facts as a humor to see if they will check the data. Like we said, McDonald's Asia Pacific director is Mr. P. Rank, which if you put it together, it was a prank. And it's going to offer a different menu like McMutton and goat milkshake. And it was very obvious facts that if the newsrooms would just ask us 1 or 2 questions, this thing would have fallen apart. But in 24 hours, all of the 9 big legacy medias ran those reports. So it took us only $4,000 to basically tell that message that McDonald's was coming to Mongolia, to all of Mongolia. Then we sent back reporters to try to confront them, and our cameraman was confiscated. We got lawsuit threats, and it really got the conversation going on media ethics, and was our means correct to do this? Did we lie to, was it unfair competition? So a public discourse really took place in Mongolian social sphere and within the media crowd. So I will play just 2 minutes from our report that we played on our primetime news, which was called Paid for Journalism, Paid for Journalism.
Голлох мэдээ болохоор үнэтэй юу?
Юу хоцтой байна гэвэл
өөр хэд болох вэ ойролцоогоор?
24 цаг барьна гэвэл нэг зүйлгүй болно.
Богино дотоод мэдээгээр оруулалт хэд болох вэ?
Ер нь 500 мянга.
Зураг дэвсээд одоо зүгээр богино мэдээнд оруулвал хэд байд юм бол?
Юу таагаа ер нь дотоод мэдээний дундуур гарна гэсэн үг шүү дээ. Тэр нь 200 мянга.
Үнэ нь хэд гэлээ хараад?
Хараа 600 мянга байна нэгтэй.
Хар үн чинь хэд гэлээ? Хараар
600.
Нэгдүгээр нүрэн дээр 8-1 чинь хэд боллоо?
Хар бол 400 шүү дээ.
За.
Хар нь 400.
So I apologize, this has no subtitles, I apologize that this has no subtitles, but that was me asking the editorial that how much would that content press release can be printed on the first page, on the evening news, and on the website news sections.
Бүхий текстийг зурагтай хамт захим хаягаар явуулж мөнгөө шилжүүлснээр тухайн худал мэдээлэл олон нийтэд ямар ч хаалтгүйгээр хүрсэн. Ингээд өчигдөр болон өнөөдөр дээрх сонин телевиз сайтуудаар дэлхийн хамгийн том түргэн хоолны сүлжээ ресторан Макдоналдс 2014 оны 1-р сарын 1-нд Чингис хааны талбайн ойролцоо аль биесны нээлттэй хийх тухай худал мэдээлэл цацагдсан юм а.
Чингис хаан талбайн ойролцоо нээлттэй эхний ресторан 2014 оны 1-р сарын 1-нд нээлттэй хийх бөгөөд нээлтийн өдөр бүтэн 10 цагийн турш
бидний хийсэн зүйл бол ердөө л энэ. Бид эдгээр телевиз сайтууд руу зөвхөн утсаар ярьсан зам цахим шуудангаар худал мэдээллээ зурагтай нь хамт мэдээлсэн байгаа. За мэдээгээ гаргуулъя гэж төлбөрийг нь шилжүүлсэн юм. Харин үүний үр дүнд мөнгө авсан телевизүүд өчигдөр орой болон өнөөдрийн мэдээгээрээ бүгд худал мэдээллийг ямар ч баримт нотлохоогүйгээр за мөн энэ мэдээллийг хаана хизээ бэ гэдгийг огт асуулгүйгээр эфирээрээ шууд цацсан гэдгийг үзэгч та бүхэндээ батлан хэлье. За мөн өглөөний гарсан бүх сонингууд энэхүү мэдээллийг эхний нүүрэндээ худал эсхийг нь асуулгүйгээр тавьсан байгаа юм а. Тэгэхээр эдгээр хэвлэл мэдээллийн хэрэгслүүдийн төлбөртэй мэдээний ханш өөр байсан байгаа. За тэгэхээр үзэгч та бүхэндээ зарим нэгээс нь дурдан харуулхад Монголын үндэсний олон нийтийн телевиз 1 минутын 500 мянган төгрөгөөр үнэлсэн байгаа юм. За харин Eagle телевизийн хувьд 1 минутын
So basically, in this visual, we explained the process that we didn't meet these media by person. We only made phone conversation, and we emailed the press release, and we paid payments right after from our accountants' personal accounts, and none of them checked the facts on the press release, and the prices that are aligned below, if we translate into USD altogether, this thing costed around $4,000. So we used anonymity as a tool to check how easy it is to get fake information out to the general public, and because at the time we really felt that Sunshine could be the only best disinfectant, and it could really start up the conversation on media ethics and where do they draw the line between church and state. And the effects came out very positive, because every media person, journalists who were in media, some criticized, some congratulated us. Public really thought this was in the public interest when we see the social media reactions. And the good thing that came out of this thing was that shortly after this thing was done, a lot of media academia and ethics professors and journalists came together and set up a club called Media Council Mongolia Club, which met every Thursday every Wednesday at 4 p.m. And this process continued on for over a year, which led to the first self-regulatory body, Media Council in Mongolia, which helps the industry to heal itself from within, to be more responsible, and to stop journalists from being sued by politicians. And so I think the methods we used was not new. We used anonymity as a tool, and we confronted to give them a fair chance to comment, and we used the information. We felt that it was basically the only way, but I think after talking to the media professionals in Mongolia, this led to the founding of Media Council of Mongolia, which is fully functional. So and independent. It was all a fair election process. So it was people who worked in Mongolian media for over three decades said it was one of the major shifts in the media houses coming together for their collective interest.
Thank you. And then our final presenter, Gargi, will talk about the Indian experience.
Yeah, hi, I'm Gargi. I'm from Cobra Post, India. So I'll start off I actually had the lessons learned at the beginning, but now I'm going to discuss them at the end and discuss the case first. So my first slide is a very obvious slide. I discuss a little bit about what investigative and undercover journalism entails. I think this is important because two things are mentioned here, because it's a serious single topic of interest. That is the first thing. So time, commitments of resources, commitments of time are very important in these cases, because you're dealing with not only conflictual situations, but you're also going up against powerful entities, powerful nexus. Also, the point in the nether region of that slide will tell you why we support independent undercover journalism. It's because getting funding or getting money from any sort of organization which has a vested interest is a strictly no-no for us. I mean, that is one of the lessons that I'll start this with. Also, the reason that I'm going to talk about these three things. I don't think there's a word. So these three things are part and parcel of what undercover reporting consists of. One is that the journalist should have some experience in this field. So when I'm talking about experience, I mean also whether you are completely committed to stay in character, so to speak, because it's not going to be anything less than method acting. If you midway, if you lose focus, if you're forgetting the lies that you're telling, if you're not recording everything that is going on, then you're not built for this. So anybody who is a complete novice has to be under training for quite a while to be completely involved in this kind of an operation. Must have access to sources and documents outside of his or her immediate influence. Not everybody who is used as a source should be related to the journalist, because that kind of compromises the integrity of the investigation. The sources themselves are subject to investigation. That's one of the most important things that we keep forgetting. Not every source is reliable. Sometimes sources are motivated by jealousy, by anger, and they will sometimes give you information which cannot be validated in any point of time whatsoever. Sources should also be placed very close to the heart of the investigation as possible. Also, to disabuse the term sting operation, I want you to know that undercover does not only involve stings. That is the very last bastion that we touch. There are now a significant amount of information available through RTIs, through inside informants, relevant documents, incriminating photographs, audiovisual material, recorded conversations, etc., and then undercover reportage with the help of a fake identity, which can be used, which can be conducted with the help of a undercover reporter and a hidden camera. Also, the case I'm going to discuss today is very strangely not a very recent case. And there were, before I get question answers from before I take questions from the audience about why I chose such an old case, this is like almost a decade-old investigation. But I want to say a couple of things about this. So the reasons are manifold, and one of them being, the reasons are manifold. One of them is that this case laid the foundation. This case laid the very basis of our next operations. Many operations based on the kind of methodology that we used in this case were used later, like the Operation Falcon Claw, etc. But I think this solidified the methodology that we used, because this gave us a lot of lessons learned. And also because the impact of this case was huge. So 11 members of the parliament, which is the most in the history of India as a democracy, 11 members of the parliament were actually expelled as a part of this, as a part of the investigation that followed this operation. So let me just discuss the operation very briefly. So the background is that the founder director of Cobra Post, Anirudh Bahl, had written a column in the Hindustan Times expressing consternation at voyeuristic exercises by the likes of India TV, who are going and talking to MPs, and he said that there are chances, that there look like there are very high chances that the MPs are actually taking money, that there is a cash flow, and they take money, they accept money for tabling questions in the parliament. Immediately, some kind of repercussion already happened. He started receiving threats. Also, a notice was served to him by a parliamentarian, Mr. Sebastian Paul, just for suggesting that it was possible for MPs to take cash. So, fearing further action, In our case, what happened was that legal action kind of became one of the cornerstones of the investigation. Because we feared more legal action, we immediately thought that we should have something to, to fall back upon if something happens. So this is what happened. We floated a fictitious organization, NISMA, North Indian Small Manufacturers Association, and we liaised with several of the middlemen of the MPs. And we encouraged them on the behalf of NISMA, this fictitious organization, to take us to the MPs and for them to table questions in lieu of cash. So questions were then tabled on behalf of NISMA, and more than 60 questions were submitted by 11 MPs, of which 25 questions were tabled in the parliament. It's a very strict balloting system. Questions cannot be tabled on the parliament in this kind of rigorous system or structure after the MPs receive cash for them. This is completely prohibited by law. This is against the democracy, against the legal system in India, which is why this had such severe repercussions later. And of course, the questions that it's always important to dabble in a little bit of humor. So when you're at the heart of the investigation, you make it as interesting as possible. And to prove that these questions were all patently ridiculous, we put in some extremely funny questions which had nothing to do with any company, which had nothing to do with anything. You can see that we had questions about Catch-22 cotton. Joseph Heller would be very happy about that. And we asked whether the ministry was lifting the 1962 ban of the book For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway, and the 1970 ban on Ken Kesey's book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And these questions were all tabled in the parliament, which had nothing to do with any proceedings whatsoever. And the funniest thing was most of these questions were tabled by more than one parliamentarian. So more than one person actually wanted to know why we didn't lift the ban on these books. So this was very interesting. So we even got an answer for the last one with the question setting department, only slightly modifying our query to change Catch-22 to suit their specification. So if they find multiple questions of the same order, they try to change the questions slightly so that they sound a little different. So our lessons learned start almost from here. So posing as a fictitious lobbying organization, we were able to actually, penetrate the nexus that was operating between the MPs and their middlemen and the other kind of organizations who were reportedly doing this. And then not only did they not only did we succeed in having the MPs table the questions, we also succeeded in having multiple MPs tabling the same questions. So this was the impact of this story. So soon after the story was aired, both the houses of the parliament expelled all the MPs. All 11 of these people were expelled. And it is therefore, we look at these stories as having actual, measurable, quantifiable socio-political impact in some way or the other. And we are therefore, this is what we look at as rewards for our stories. So lessons in ethics, I think when the information obtained is so profoundly vital for public interest that they reveal great systemic failures. When the reporter has prior information of certain misdeeds which are being created, but they need time to focus on the problem and they need time to garner enough evidence. When all the other alternatives of obtaining some information or proving the charge has failed and has been exhausted. But what does not justify it? So here we are coming to when your undercover reportage is absolutely not justified. Number one is doing it for a competitive advantage, where you want a story so bad that you're willing to go to any lengths and you're willing to, risk everything to just get to the heart of the story. Or if you're doing it for, a freaking Pulitzer or something. But aiding other parties with vested interest, this I've already mentioned before, any other party which you think has a competing vested interest against the party you're investigating, to be involved in those parties while the investigation is underway is not at all ethical for a journalist. And also doing it for because others are directly on the story, some other reporter is doing the story, and you think that you have a competitive advantage and you can take advantage of that situation is not okay. Going into what else justify the scenario when the journalists involved are willing to disclose the nature of the deception and the reasons for it. This is very important because to your sources, you always have to be extremely open. You cannot lie about your identity to the sources. You can lie about your identity to the party that you're trying to catch hold of, but you cannot lie about your identity or your motives to the sources who are close to you and you, in a way, who are working for you and risking their lives for you. When individuals involved and the news organization pledged the commitment of time and funding, when the harm prevented by the information, I think this is one of the most important lessons learned, when the harm prevented by the information revealed through deception outweighs any harm caused by the act of deception. So what you get out of the investigation, the public good that it enacts should be much greater than the harm that it perpetrates. And after the journalists involved have undertaken a meaningful, collaborative, and deliberative impact assessment with respect to the ethical and legal issues involved, obviously you are putting someone's privacy to task, and obviously there are ethical and legal issues which will follow in the wake of this. This is a very important point. When not to do it, obviously, when the security of the journalist or the source is very heavily compromised, when the information gathered is invalid, incorrect, or otherwise suspect, when impact assessment of legal and ethical fallout is incorrect or incomplete, the revelations shall have no immediate or forward-reaching impact at all. You're just doing it because you want to have an exercise in undercover journalism. That's a very bad way of doing it. Your overall priorities should include these, including the safety of the journalists, the safety of the sources, collection of documentary and video evidence very carefully, and very carefully cross-checking the validity and the credibility of the evidence, focusing on the information being presented to the right people at the right time so that meaningful impact can actually happen, and creating a credible and cogent, objective, fact-based narrative rather than something, And it's very easy for journalists to actually start chasing conspiracy theories, but that's not what undercover journalism is all about. I mean, if you really do see an alien waving outside your window, it's a different thing. But chasing conspiracy theories and doing meaningful undercover reporting is very, very different. So you have to choose your stories very carefully, measure their impact, and see how much good it will do for you to devote months of your time and energy and resources chasing those stories that you're chasing. So ask yourself these three things. I think these more or less sum it up. Have you exhausted all other investigative options? Does the public service of the investigation outweigh the deception involved in using a hidden camera? And is there an escape plan in case the undercover reporter is exposed? That these are important. So potential risks and damages, yes, I mean, these are important to discuss. Actual physical damage, threat. If you're going up against powerful nexus, including government officials, I mean, all hell can break loose and, pardon my French, but shit can actually hit the roof. So unleashing the hounds of the state against you in all forms of menaces. Legal menace is the least of them. You can actually incur physical harm, physical damage. And I've been hearing multiple panels discuss what kind of dangers the journalists these days incur, and there have been many, many deaths, which are absolutely unfortunate. And yet, I hope I'm ending on a positive note. So an investigative journalist empowered with the might of hidden camera can do much damage to the high and mighty, as we have discovered. And I would want to end this with a very short video, which is like a melange of stories that Cobra Post has done, which discusses a bit of the impact that we have had and the kind of nexuses that we have been able to penetrate through the might of the hidden camera.
रिश्ता जोड़ दो और जब बच्चा हम लोग कराते हैं रिश्ता तोड़ दो प्लीज नहीं डॉक्टर साहब ऐसा मत करिए प्लीज जी जी अरे नहीं डॉक्टर साहब प्लीज आप ऐसा नहीं करिए
करके लिटाया। जिस टाइम गरम गरम पानी गिरा इसके अंदर, उस टाइम बाबा अल्लाह मियाँ
banks and not take action against them. It's a big question now.
हमारा सिर्फ कन्वर्ट हो जाए, वाइट हो जाए हमारा, बस वाइट प्लस बढ़ के मिल रहा है हमको, और क्या चाहिए, बस वो कह रहा हूँ वाइट हो जाए।
लोग नष्ट हो जाएं इससे इनको कोई मतलब नहीं, इनको मतलब पैसा मिले, कुर्सी मिले।
घोषणा कर रहे थे घाटा तोड़ो, इसलिए कि हमने आप लोगों को घाटा तोड़ने के लिए बुलाया, वो घाटा तोड़ गया।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल साहब ने माहिती तो મળે જ છે ભાઈ, આ બહુ ચિત્રો દેખાય। જી જી સર, તો તમે જરા હું હમણાં જઉં છું સર, હું પણ આટો મારી લઉં, એકવાર જોઈ લો ને તમે। હું જઈને જઉં છું, નજીક જ છું સર, પહોંચું છું, 10 મિનિટમાં પહોંચી જઉં છું।
एक कोट कर दीजिए सर, 50 तो ज्यादा है, इतना मुझे मैंने सर खुल के बता दिया आपने।
Wow, very sobering. Obviously, an underlying theme for all of these stories and most of these stories is that there's a lot of corruption out there. There's a lot that can be bought, cash for thesis, cash for questions, cash for news stories. And as they indicated, sometimes this is the only way to get the story, but you do have to worry about it being sensational. Okay, thank you again for sharing your stories, and I'd like to open it up to our audience for questions or comments for our speakers. Any questions, please? Yes, the front table. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mogi. I'm a freelance journalist from Mongolia, and I have two questions to Lavga. First one is about measuring the impact of your story. Do you think that the fact-checking or researching in Mongolian media organizations is getting better? And the second question is about, we all know that media organizations in Mongolia are not independent. They are dependent on politicians, businesses, and mostly on money. And how do you think that, in this case, journalists can build their independence?
One good questions, Mogi. So after we did the McDonald's story, as local media knows, we had threatening of lawsuits from a daily newspaper, and one of the fair competition chiefs, politician, also said the other media should sue. But I think listening to the two colleagues here, on timing, I didn't answer when is a good time to do undercover work, and we use some of the undercover elements, and as I don't think there's a good timing or a bad timing for undercover, and then I'll answer your question. If there's a big systematic failure, and if you're really angry about it, you have to prepare well with the end in mind. You have some kind of end in mind, and you just have to do it. And when we did that, one of the positive outcomes the next day was Mongolian advertisement law says the broadcaster or the media have to verify the facts of even advertisement. But they're not even checking news stories, not even asking a question, not fact-checking. But Allah.mn, one of the news websites, at the time it was one of the big trees, actually promised that, okay, we get it, we get what you're trying to do, and we will check every content that's being pushed into us from marketing. So we saw that as a big progress. And overall, just talking to media people at Mongolian Television Forum and elsewhere, I think marketing managers, the people who push the media houses to push the boundaries between news story and just content, actually got a big reality check. So we didn't academically reviewed the impact, but I think the progress, I think it has gotten better. But as Marty Barron of Boston Globe he gave interview to Neiman, I think he said, content is a word that's killing my industry. And I think I completely agree with him. When people talk about good content, producing good content together, sometimes they always ask editorial to bend the rules of journalism. And what was your second question? Independent. Oh, what should we do? I thought we really talked about what we should do last night. but no. I think we should aim on media training, and consolidation of Mongolian medias have to take place given the economic hardship that we're facing. But I think education is big key, and independent organizations like Press Institute and what we talked about. I think coming to this conference, Mongolian journalists and media representatives, we are really fired up to fire up the first Mongolian Investigative Journalism Center when we return. I think institutions like that and proper training will really build a new model of journalism, startups that will have a very different value set than our legacy media, the media who's mostly run by politicians.
Very good. Yes, question over there.
Hi, I'm Sonia Sarkar. I work with the Telegraph newspaper in India. This is a question for Gargi. Are you a reporter or a desk person? If you can clarify that.
Kind of everything. Okay. So I am a reporter, but I'm also their senior producer.
Okay.
So the videos that we make, strategizing about them, how we're going. I would do more online field reporting, but I have a 1-year-old baby, so I mean I don't want to orphan her as yet. So I'll go down into the field after she grows up a little bit.
So my question is, when you do such undercover reporting, is it that a
No, we never outsource it. Okay. It is too close to, I mean, this was one of the points where I was saying that the journalist should have a very close team. Nobody who is hired from outside. I mean, you'll always have a question about their integrity, whether they have any kind of outside motive egging them on, or they are linked to any other organizations which might have vested interest, etc. So all Cobra Post undercover operations are done by Cobra Post teams. Actually, my team is sitting right here in the first table. You can actually interact with them to know more about how they do it, but all of them are like genius in their own right. I mean, I'm pretty sure an Oscar awaits them someday, but not yet.
Other questions, comments, sharing of anecdotes? Anyone?
Yeah, we especially welcome anybody who wants to share case studies with us, because that's been one of our abiding interests. If you are working in undercover journalism and you want to share your stories, your operations with us, that will be very, very helpful, and we'll be super excited to hear them.
Excuse me, ma'am. I'm from Nepal. I have a question for you. Okay, you have been doing such investigative, you have been bringing out or uncovering such investigative reporting by using such hidden cameras. So do you get any security threats after that? So how do you maintain that?
Yes, security threats are actually part of our daily life. I mean, we most of the times we deal with these threats as they come, and we do take police protection. Our, our founder director has been under police protection for many of these threats for considerable periods of time. At a time, he gets protection for like 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, or even more, because some cases have much more impact than other cases. But we do deal with it from case-to-case basis, also because the names of the reporters, we don't very easily give out the identities of the reporters, and even when we do, we make very sure that they're protected and that nobody knows what they look like. For example, if you're splashing a story and you are actually showing the reporter's face in some of these cases, that is kind of dangerous, so we don't do that very often. And in case there are legal battles or court cases where the journalist actually has to go, we definitely make them go under police protection.
Yes. Anuragji, please make my question in English. अहिलेसम्मको छलफलमा हामीले तीनवटा कुरा बुझ्यौं। यो सामान्यतया पटक पटक गरिरहनु हुँदैन, अर्को विकल्प भएसम्म यसलाई प्रयोग गर्नु हुँदैन। यो सार्वजनिक उद्देश्यका लागि हुनुपर्छ र सार्वजनिक गर्ने उद्देश्यले हुनुपर्छ। यति भनिसकेपछि मलाई प्रश्न गर्न मन लाग्यो, यो कुनै रिपोर्टरले गरिरहेको छ भने उसको एडिटरलाई थाहा हुनुपर्छ कि पर्दैन? यदि यो अन्डरकभर रिपोर्टिङ चाहिँ न्यूज रूम र रिपोर्टरको बीचको लिंक के हुनुपर्छ? अन्यथा यसको मिसयुज हुने खतरा पनि त रहेछ नि।
The question is, we've discussed about how ethical we have to be while doing an undercover reporting by not being, doing it for, doing sake, or not doing it without sufficient, public interest backing it up. But how about, the relationship between the editor and the undercover reporter? Should there be a kind of, sharing between the editor and the reporter even during the time of investigation, or does it, jeopardize the entire undercover?
अब यस बारेमा चाहिँ मैले गरेको अनुभव भने के हो भने तपाईको रिपोर्टर र एडिटरको बीचको ट्रस्ट कस्तो छ भन्ने कुरामा यो डिपेन्ड गर्छ। कुनै कुनै मिडिया हाउसमा कस्तो हुन्छ भने रिपोर्टरले एडिटरलाई विश्वास नै गर्न नसकेको अवस्था भइरहेको हुनाले त्यस्तो अवस्थामा रिपोर्टरले नभन्न पनि सक्छ, यो उसको छुट हुन्छ। फेरि अगेन यस्तो केसमा चाहिँ रिपोर्टरले के ख्याल गर्नुपर्छ भने उसले चाहिँ मैले एडिटरलाई पनि भनेको छैन र म अन्डरकभर भएर जाँदैछु भनेर अन्डरकभर रिपोर्ट गर्न लागेको बेलामा उसले आफ्नो रिस्पोन्सिबिलिटी भुलेर चाहिँ उसले त्यसलाई मिसयुज गर्ने खतरा चाहिँ रहनु हुँदैन।
There is a clear danger of blowing your cover while you are sharing your undercover reporting idea or when it is still in the investigation with too many people. But having said that, the journalist sometimes chooses not to share it with the editor or the larger newsroom or editorial team for fear that the story might get leaked and there might be danger. But there is also chances that if the reporter keeps it to himself and does not have somebody who knows that the journalist is undercover, then it ends up jeopardizing his own security. So it does not do good to the reporter or the operation itself.
In our case it's a bit different because in the cases that we get involved in which are against huge businesses or corporate entities or even governments, etc., we need to be a little more on guard. So in our case the editor and the reporter do share information, but we make sure to always have the added security of encryption. We always encrypt the information. We always necessarily refer to sources in their aliases. even the editor, I mean, the only thing that the editor is not always privy to is the identity of the source, because the source for us is more important and needs more protection than the journalist in some cases. So in our case, we do share information, but security of data, security of information, encryption of data and information, and the anonymity of the sources are paid full attention to.
Langwa?
Yesterday, I was after lunch, I was talking to a publisher who said that if my team decides to do undercover work, I just tell them that I'm sure you guys, your heart is in the right place. Just do it. Don't tell me what it is. But I mean, sitting on a panel with Cobra Post, I mean, what we did was we gave the media houses a right to comment. But if you, let's say, if we recorded a wrongdoing, a criminal activity, you can't always go back and ask for fair comment. You will put yourself in danger, and you just have to run with what you have by revealing corruption or wrong activity. But before coming here, I was talking to Mark Lee Hunter, who wrote the Investigative Journalism Manual, and Mark is one of the journalists who has been in this game, who's very against undercover reporting. And he basically gave me the rhetoric that journalists are the people who can ask any question from anyone, any given time. And why would you want to give that away? I think it was a big rhetoric that I wrestled with coming here. And I have to say that Mongol TV, we had many failed attempts of trying to record wrongdoings. We tried to investigate into a politician's building that he built under the name of Disabled Children's Grant. He got a city land rights, but our cameraman and the reporter got caught up by the police. And the criminal codes in Asia, I think Doreen can confirm that it's a very, very dark area that you're going into. And if you don't have an escape plan, you can be, things can turn bad really quickly because it's criminal investigation. You're basically prosecuted. The case goes so fast if you recorded an official, and in most countries that I've looked when I see media law, that there's crimes against the state, you can go away for that, and that's one of the most. It's not even. It won't be a media lawsuit. It will be lawsuits that traitors and double agents go by, and we had very bad cases of prosecutions in Mongolia. So I wouldn't recommend it, and I think all of the checklist and those questions, as a team or as a freelance journalist, you really have to have a big debate, and you have to be well prepared to go into even small undercover operations.
We have time for just one more question. Yes, over there.
I expect my answers from Gagri. While doing video stories, video investigations using hidden cameras and exposing it in pictures and graphics, is it necessary to be sensitive about how perpetrators and victims, when we publish a story, their perception, is it necessary to be sensitive? Because usually when we expose the big story, big leaks in video and pictures, they are generally considered as provocative and sensational. But the fact is there. And how do you think that, what is your impression? I mean, how to neutralize it as a balanced state?
So our principle in balancing it is very simple. I mean, we are sensitive, but we are sensitive to the victims. To the perpetrators, we extend no such sympathy because, sympathizing with the perpetrator would make no sense under the circumstances. I mean, if we are taking the trouble to go undercover, research something for months at a time, or even, sometimes the better part of a year, or maybe 2 years, 3 years, and the more we get into the nexus, the more we realize how unscrupulous, how dark this entire thing is. And so any sympathy that you might have started out with is very quickly dissipated. So that's one good thing. But if you're, for example, especially stories that have victims who are minors, who are children, who are women, who are pubescent boys and girls. In these cases, we exercise a very, very strict code of ethics. We do not give out information, identities. We are very protective of them because they have already been exploited and co-opted by one system. It doesn't really serve our purpose if we also go ahead and co-opt the same.
Anyway, thank you so much for your attention and for your very insightful questions. And feel free to talk with our panelists at coffee and at other breaks throughout the rest of this conference. I'd like to give another round of applause for our very brave journalists. And if any of you get into legal trouble, you have my business card.